Well, welcome everyone to our discussion today about policy. Before absolutely anything else gets going, I will start by acknowledging that I am speaking with everyone today from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I'm sure you know who I am, so I'm not going to go through my regular introduction today, but I do want to make sure that we actually introduce everyone that's here, that's on the team, that is going to be sharing today, if they would like to introduce themselves. But what our discussion centers around today is our platform, which we're very happy to have released today, and also our policy development process. And after intros, I'll speak a little bit about what that was like and what it means to us, and also what it doesn't mean in terms of Green Party and Green Party policy. So I am the candidate in this. At the very beginning, we structured the process of policy and how we would like to go about it. And I stuck my nose in there quite a bit, but it definitely wasn't me that made this happen. So I'll first give the chance to the policy leads that are here and anyone else on the team who wants to introduce themselves, a bit about your background. Mine's in astrophysics, so I brought some stuff about tech and science. Chance, would you like to go?
Well, thank you very much. As you know, my name is Chance Davies. I go by him, he, him pronouns. I'm from Calgary, Treaty 7 territory, which is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Stoney Nakoda, Tsuut'ina, and Métis Nation Region 3. Graduated from the University of Calgary in 2017 with a BA in political science. Realized that I needed to get a job, so I scampered back to university to get a Bachelor of Education, only to find that the pandemic had put life on pause. But so with that happening, I joined Amita's campaign, and I'm so happy and blessed to be here today. I'll pass it off to Kito for introductions.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Kito Romero. I also have a BA in political science from the University of British Columbia. I am in Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations as well. I have always been interested in politics as long as I can remember. And I was put in contact with Amita's campaign at the beginning of the campaign, basically, and really found my place here and have enjoyed the process very much.
Is there anyone else who's here who is on the team that would like to introduce themselves? Please go ahead. If not, I will continue.
Sure, I will.
Okay,
so,
go ahead.
My name's Stephanie. My pronouns are they, them. I'm on Siksikadefi territory, as well as Region 3 for the Métis, which is also known as Lethbridge, Alberta. I brought my knowledge from having a master's in environmental science to the policy, as well as accessibility, brought in an accessibility expert too, and taxes, and that's kind of where my background in the policy development helps with.
Right. Anyone else? Otherwise, I will get going. All right, so first of all, I think I have to express how proud I am with everybody that put this together. There were overall from the beginning to now, and there's a core group of people who've worked on things, but there were over 30 people that did a ton of work to actually make this happen, between editing and graphics and also accessibility and lots of policy thought. And that doesn't even include all the members that we talked to and the experts that we consulted with, and also people with lived experience in a number of different policy areas. And I am feeling just entirely overwhelmed today with pride and also gratitude. At the very front of this concept of policy and platform, I want to address the fact that the Green Party is a member-driven party. So what we set out to do is practice the policy development process, see what it's like to come up with policies or even reframe the policies that exist and actually present them in a way that is accessible. And so we know that what actually goes into platforms and policy within the Green Party is member approved. And this is not supposed to be a replacement of that, but a practice of communication and policy development that we would like to share with the party and empower members to be able to recreate. And there's also the question of what a policy platform is actually supposed to do. And a lot of what we focused on was communication, especially with accessibility. How do we transform our values and our vision for the future into something that we can actually explain to people? And so there's a difference between that too and a document that is meant to be translated immediately.
Scale, just ignore it. I pocket dialed.
There's something different between
Don't answer
having...
that. Just go into your...
Anthony, could you mute, please? There's something different between having a policy document that is meant to be communicated to everybody and a policy document that is meant to be turned into governance. So we know that turning all our ideas that we laid out in this in broad form, that not everything we put out there are the right ideas or what we should be doing, but they're concepts for us to explore. And also, if this turns into something that is meant to be turned into the policy document of a government, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And we have some of it. It's more like a framing of how we present it. Is this something that is full of legalese, or is it something that we're actually being able to talk about what we're trying to do and then it's backed up somewhere else? And that concept of it also being a living document. This is something that we hope to grow and change. And for now, we're just so excited to present what it is. So for today's schedule, we have an hour and a half total. And so I think the best thing that we can do is I'm going to ask some questions first of our main policy people who are here today and have a discussion about what this entire process was like. And then we will move about halfway through into questions and answers for everybody. And so I'll just facilitate this for now and also show that it really wasn't me that got this done. So the first question, and I'm sorry it's a bit open-ended, but how did you do this? This is a leadership campaign and we put out a platform. What was it like and how did it become possible?
Well, I think the first thing to take note of is this has been a work in progress over the first 5 months of this campaign. Back in March, we really began with the policy development process, and no policy development process should be rushed, right? I mean, we're dealing with people's lives here, and we're dealing with a party that has developed policies over decades, and we understand that that requires a lot of hard work. And throughout the process, we found out what that hard work was. But we began by essentially looking at different policies that we would like to see implemented. We wanted to envision what we wanted this country to look like. And I think that's key because in politics, quite often we look at a lot of these statistics and we look at a lot of these pieces of legislation, but politics comes down to political imagination and viewing a world in which we want ourselves and our loved ones and our kids to live in. And so as we started brainstorming these ideas, we wanted to put those down in what became the preliminary policy or platform, if you will. And that came out, I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Kito, I think that came out around early June, mid-June.
Yeah,
Does that sound about right? And what that was, it was a collection of 12 different sections where we consulted with each other and people outside of the Green Party and within the Green Party to reimagine each one of those sections. So we had like discussions about where do we see the 21st century taking us as far as technology is concerned? How do we view Canada should relate to the rest of the world? What does a prosperous economy look like for regular Canadians? And so we wrote those down. We came up with 3 policies for each section that we kind of thought, these are important. We really want to make sure people understand that. And then we continued with that process. We had so much feedback. I cannot tell you how many emails we got, and I'm sure we're still working our way through some of these emails. People sent us so many good resources, so many good insights that resulted in changing and amending, restructuring. And it took us a decent amount of time from that June preliminary documents release to today to really narrow down those policies and think about what those policies would look like for regular Canadians. An additional component of all this is that the end document that we wanted to have, we wanted it to be accessible. When we look at Vision Green, and Vision Green is a great document, and the people who worked hard on that document should be very proud. And we recognize that that's not an election platform, but we wanted to make sure that our policy was accessible to people. A lot of Canadians, they don't have the time that a lot of policy wonks might have to invest in political discussions, and we wanted to make sure that when we're releasing this, we use plain English that regular folks, working class folks, could look at and say, yes, I understand what we're saying. We're not writing this for academics. We're writing this for, normal folks. And I think that we had so much consultation to make that happen. So I guess that would be a very quick brief, Amita, of kind of how we got to where we are. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Kito?
Well, yeah, I mean, not just consultation from everyone, but every single topic, especially in those first 12 that we identified, we put a tremendous amount of research into every single one. I mean, I'm sorry for making Amita read all of it, but most of the topics had like 50-page research documents in the background to really support what we were saying, to make sure that all our policies really were evidence driven and that they made sense and wasn't just symbolic or anything like that. So that I think was one of the foundational things as well.
I would add to that the huge amount of work that went into going through past Green Platform and the Vision Green itself to figure out how it was that we connected to all of that and related to it. Because we didn't really start from pure scratch in terms of policies. We were starting from the baseline of where the Green Party is and being like, how do we communicate how we feel about this and everything that this means to us, and how does that translate into policy? And it was nice to have that. And it was I didn't do a lot of the work in that, but looking at the evaluation that was done of that was enlightening.
And that part was really a team process. I mean, everyone took these massive sections from these huge policy documents and really analyzed them like down to the nitty gritty. So that was a huge collaborative effort.
Right. So that gives us a sense of the basic structure, and I think we'll get a little bit more into team function in a bit. But I want to next talk about, since it comes up so much about the Green Party, about climate and ecological wisdom. And I'll get to values in general after this, but I want to talk about what it means to approach policy from a climate lens and from an ecological wisdom lens. Because rather than saying, well, we have this piece that addresses climate change, the way I think we need to address, especially communicating about our future, is making sure that everything that we're doing is actually from that perspective. But that's not a particularly obvious or easy thing to do given the way that policy is usually approached. So I would love to hear what you think about that.
Well, I think that in the 21st century, there are two issues, and they're interconnected, and they are the seminal issues of this century. It is the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis. In every element of policy that we looked at, those two issues, they impacted everything. They impacted everything from interstate violence within at-risk climates across the world. They affected everything from AI. They affected everything from labor. What does our jobs look like for the future? And so everything that we put in this platform, we have been cognizant that we are in a crisis. And it's not just a national crisis that we have experienced within our country's history, but it is a global crisis unlike anything that we've seen in our lifetimes or within humanities. And that requires a degree of grandiose scale that is not comfortable by the main parties. The main parties do not want to talk about these crises because what they require is full mobilization of just about every element of our society to make sure that not only can we address climate change and the biodiversity crisis, but we can do so in a just way that makes sure that every person in this country and the globe is able to live freely and to live with full prosperity and make sure that their needs are taken care of. And if that sounds like a big ask, it is. It is a big ask. And I mean, that's what this race and every race going forward is going to be about, is who has the best ideas in doing that. And we don't have all the answers. I mean, as Amita said, this is a living document, and it's going to require everyone's teamwork. And that's why not only did we have all these sections talking about both those crises, we wanted to make sure that we were working with the municipal, the federal, the territorial, and indigenous governments of this country to make sure that we come to address that. That's why when you're reading this document, you're going to see lots of times we say work with, and then we say the 4 different governments, because we know that this is a group effort, and it's always been a group effort, maybe more than ever. If that answers your question.
I suppose I'll say the other part of it for me that has been important is the climate crisis is so immediate that we had addressing that through everything. But the other side is the future from an ecologically wise lens, and the idea of how we actually want to set up our society so that it is better integrated in our ecosystems and is actually sustainable. Yeah, but I think you covered that really well. Does anyone have anything else before I move on to the next question?
Well, I just think that we've tried really hard not to forget about the human aspect of all these things. So even though the environment was the foundation of everything that we did, every policy, regardless of what it pertained to, we always tried to make sure that it looked at both sides, at the human aspect and the environmental aspect, to make sure that we could continue to coexist.
I think that to me ended up being a part of ecological wisdom, is caring for all the people at the same time, and that there is no separation between climate justice and social justice anymore because of having that framework. It's a very comfortable place to get to, I think. So I think that leads into the concept of having a value and our green values. And I think we talked early on about what our interpretation is of the green values, because they are what they are and everyone has a different view of them. And also this vision for the future of inclusion, of justice and equity and all of that. And how you then translate and always keep your values in mind when you're creating policy. Because for me, that's actually kind of where this started. The political process should be, right? About what do we want this to look like? What do we care about? So when you're actually developing policies, like this is maybe actually a more technical question. When you're looking at policies and when you're coming up with things, how do you tie in all the values to make sure that you're feeling self-consistent about what you're putting forward?
Take it.
Kito?
Yeah. Well, so we have our 3 main pillars, right? Justice, credibility, and readiness. And every time we tackled any topic, we tried to look through it through those 3 lenses to make sure that anything we did was just. Credibility obviously refers to evidence, making sure that everything was backed up by science or any other type of process that needed to be backed up by. And readiness was making sure that our communities are ready and resilient in the face of any future crises that comes. So it was a challenge, but I think that just looking through those lenses and having those really clear 3 goals to address it made the process a lot easier.
Yeah, it's certainly a big ask to look through these 3 pillars, in addition to the Green Party of Canada's 4 main tenets, and to balance those needs and desires to make sure that Canadians are best equipped. I think one of the sections that I'm most proud of is the resilience section. I mean, this is a section that began as 2 sections. The domestic vulnerabilities, and I do believe it was literally called Creating a Resilient Society. And in that section right there, we had so much overlap. It was because not only do we have to create a resilient society, which means that we have to be ready for the climate emergency, but we also have to make sure that the ways that we're preparing are credible and based in science and based in what experts find is necessary. And not only that, we also need to make sure that while we are producing these capabilities to make a resilient society, that the communities that are most at risk due to climate change, due to the biodiversity crisis, those are the communities that need the support first and foremost.
And the
Communities, especially within the Arctic area, those are places that are going to require a great deal of assistance and a great deal of empowerment to make sure that they can do that. So none of this is easy, for sure. And we're really proud of how we were able to do it, but we couldn't have done it without people talking in our ear and letting us know where our blind sites are, or blind spots, because we all have them. And I think that's why it's important to listen to people.
Yeah, absolutely. So continuing on that exact feeling and thought is the evidence piece. How is it that one actually consults evidence? And maybe I'm the one here that's like, haha, answer the question for me, because I'm the scientist and I'm the one that talks so much about actually bringing evidence into politics, and my constant annoyance with the fact that I feel like most people that say evidence-based policy isn't. But now that we've been through this process and really always maintaining a values-driven lens, and so before we talk about what that actually looks like, I want to talk about the concept to me of what evidence-based policy really is. Because whenever I think about the scientific method and scientific thought, what's missing from evidence-based policy is actually fundamental assumptions and intention. Because so many people will just pick something and be like, oh, well, I looked at this and this study says if we build more houses, then we've solved housing. And that makes no sense to me, because it doesn't tell you whether you actually accept the current status quo, for instance. And that's a massive assumption. If you think the systems that we actually live under are fair, if you even think some of the basic concepts, that the way our economy functions, or the way we even look at land ownership, for instance, like these are massive things upon which every policy has been built before. And it's not even that, but it's about your goal that you're trying to achieve. Is it about housing people, or is it about solving homelessness? And is it from a compassionate lens, or is it about enforcement of some ideals? And is it about including people? Is it about freedom? Is it about control? All of these are concepts that come into something before you can look at evidence. And then you look at a wide range of things. What is everybody saying? But you have to have a goal in mind already before you approach that process, or you're not going to get something that's evidence-based. You're going to get an idea, and instead of an actual proposal for a solution and something that you know will actually accomplish what you want. But I also think it's clear to continue to make it obvious what that you're actually trying to accomplish. So what was it like actually creating policy and being dedicated to following best available evidence?
I'll express this talking about a specific example, because I like talking about things and examples. Discussions that we had in the platform, one of them, for instance, is we all want to live in a healthy society, and we all kind of know what living in a healthy society means. It means that people have nutritious meals. It means that people have access to active transportation and active living. It means that people are near clean water, clean air, and it means a whole host of different things. But we had to discuss, and Vision Green has it, the idea of a junk food tax. And we had to look at the different, and we certainly had a lot of discussion, and that's the way that we get past any of these issues, is we have discussions about these issues, and we look at the evidence, and there's certainly a lot of stuff done about junk food taxes throughout the wider world, and it required us to look through them in order to find out whether or not this was something that would be truly just. And we decided against it. We believe that individuals who consume junk food are in disproportionately impoverished areas that are, food deserts, as they're commonly referred to. And it's not just as simple as putting a tax on it and then, haha, now we've solved it. Now they're going to buy different things. It's much more complicated than that. And we found that junk food taxes were regressive, just plain and simple, and it didn't necessarily treat individuals with respect and dignity that they deserve, and it treated them very paternalistically. And we want, throughout this whole platform, I mean, as you're saying, I mean, we're looking at this through values as well. I mean, there's no way to just look at the evidence without holding ourselves to values. And we had to really examine that to make sure that we're also being socially just. And junk food taxes are not socially just. And that's why we don't have it, because there's no evidence for it, and because it's not consistent with who we are as a party. That would be an example, because that's the best way to express a very complicated idea like that. What do you think, Kito? What's up?
Well, for me, I'll talk about the process. For me, it was, like Amita said, it was consulting with just a variety of different sources, reading a ridiculous amount of literature on any topic, looking at different research studies, reaching out to old professors or friends who I knew were involved in the relevant topic, and then kind of compiling everything into my own research document and finding the commonalities in what people were saying, finding where people disagreed, finding where our vision fit into that, and then kind of using that as a pathway to guide which way the policy would go and what made the most sense, what had the most backup for what we could say there. And it was just a long, tedious process of just looking at just a whole bunch of stuff and just making sure that we tried to get it as right as we could.
And yet here we all are smiling at the end of this process.
It's a great time.
I want to just touch on one of the things I think you kind of alluded to here, Chance, in aligning things to values. And it's the fact that we called our platform, which I can show you, we printed a copy, and it is like a matter of pride to me. We called it balanced leadership, because I think a lot of what conversations that we had came back down to was balance. And I've said it way too many times now, but it's often in political development, something about whether you are incentivizing or disincentivizing something. And I've now termed it, and people say it, carrot versus stick. And I think that it's actually always, you end up with a balance of the two, and you want to apply things carefully. And that you don't ever say, well, we're only going to use one method of looking at something. And, you can say we want to find ways also to disincentivize people eating sugary foods, and that's part of junk food. But you don't want to, for instance, remove people's only access to affordable food when they have no other options without first providing those options. But there already, you're saying, let's look at both ways of doing these things, or multiple ways of doing these things, and figure out what the point of balance actually is. So on that balance and working together, and I think also saying that we've had discussions, because we have had disagreements. There were a lot of people on this, and there were also a lot of people coming from very different schools of thought, different backgrounds, different ways of life, that actually duked it out in, I think, a very fun and polite way, where we got to have wild discussions about things. I shouldn't say wild anymore. Fun. I think wild is fun. Fun discussions and in-depth discussions about what we'd actually like to see and why we think things. So how was it? How was the teamwork aspect in this? And what was it like to build consensus from really disagreeing views?
I think when it comes to teamwork, I mean, I'm going to be biased because I love our team. I really do. The amount of, I mean, like you were saying, 30 people plus were involved in this. And throughout the whole process, I never felt like there was any disrespect. I never felt like anyone was talking over each other. I felt like people were giving each other space. And I think that that's critical to any type of team. I mean, anyone who's ever worked in a team knows that we need respect in those environments in order to prosper. And that extends to debating. I mean, there's a lot of division within all political parties, within all campaigns, and finding ways to balance various interests is one of the most beautiful things about politics. It's not something that people often talk about, though. A lot of times when people talk about politics, they talk about us versus them. They talk about partisanship. And it doesn't have to be this way. The Green Party, at least in my opinion, has always been a party that has tried to work hard with each other to make sure that we could come to consensus and work with other people in Parliament. And we do a good job. And that's the same as with this team as well. I just love our team. I really do. There's no other way beyond that.
I think one of the best examples of that was I think 3 or 4 of us, everyone from pretty much opposing views, had a 3.5-hour phone call on gun policy. And the policy itself only ended up being like 3 or 4 sentences, but it took us just hours of debating to finally land on something that everyone was happy with. And I think we found a pretty good middle ground where people can be satisfied with it. I think Stephanie had something to say on that.
Oh yeah, that one was good, and so was the junk food one that Chance brought up. It was really interesting because you could see everyone had the same goals in mind, that they just wanted the best output, but because of different education backgrounds or different lived experiences, different aspects hadn't been thought of. So by having more people involved in the discussion, it really allowed us to see the problems with an overarching view so that we could bring it down to something that would actually look at solving the issues instead of just Band-Aid fixes. And I think that's what a lot of our policy is looking at dealing with the core issues instead of trying to manage the problems individually. So.
I think you just touched on something there that is probably the most fundamental thing that I got out of this, watching this process and experiencing this process, is that is the hope that I have for transforming governance, is that a lot of us actually have the same goals. We want to see the same things. We'd like to actually see the same changes, but we don't know that because of the way that people tend to communicate about things, because of their backgrounds and because of the tendency to division in politics. And so if we actually sit down respectfully and be like, all right, what is it? We realize that we want the same things, and that if we work together, we'll actually come out with something stronger. And the goal should be long-term stability of policies. And on that as well, I think there's another point of balance, which is about immediate needs and long-term plans. And in things like looking at junk food, for instance, though it's also the lens of saying, well, we don't want this long-term, but how do you deal with the justice issue in the immediacy of the moment? Okay, so the next thing I have on my list to ask about is accessibility. And so there's a couple different things I want to make sure we touch on here, because it's actually such a wide topic. And some of it is very, very, very literal accessibility, in the sense that we wanted it to be accessible, physically readable, and done also if you want to have it read to you. So that's one piece graphically as well. And the campaign has been working on that. But then there's also just the whole concept of communicating policy ideas that I mentioned in the beginning, and making sure that there are actually things that people can understand, and that has to do with the language that's used. So I'd like to hear from all three of you actually on this, in what you found enlightening about it, but also, you know, what was your general experience working with it, and what relevance does it have to you also in the process?
Stephanie, do you want to
I
start on this
guess
one?
I'll start on that one.
Yeah.
So when I first joined Amita's campaign, one of the factors I brought up was the accessibility, as I was the local candidate for the 2019 elections in my area for the Green Party. And we had this amazing individual in our community who actually went through every single party's platform and made it accessible to everyone else. And they were nice enough to come on and help us with Amita's policy. But since that had been revealed to me, how inaccessible so many of our platforms were, it just made me realize how much it makes democracy hard to access by a lot of people in our communities, especially with language barriers. I myself have many learning disabilities, so I find a lot of that stuff hard to get through at times too, where just changing the formatting of a sentence makes a huge difference. And just being aware of that is it's a huge thing. And it was really awesome to come onto a team that maybe originally didn't know that much about the accessibility issues or the different varying ones of them, but were willing to learn and accept that. And we spent so many hours trying to work through it. And I know that it's not perfect. Nothing is ever fully perfect, but a lot of effort and learned experiences have come from this document, and it's really exciting that way.
Yeah, and to add to that, when you're working in politics, when you're examining politics, when you're in an academic setting in any capacity, people have a tendency to form a bubble around them. And that bubble has words and it has jargon. And it's not the words and jargon that a lot of folks are used to using. It's not how people communicate. People do not communicate by talking about plurinational constitutional arrangements. That was one example. And we knew this going in, but when we finished our first draft of this document that was released today, and we went through it with our accessibility helper, for lack of a better term, they communicated to us that this was not something that regular folks could read. Like, regular folks could not read this. And what's the point of that? What is honestly the point of having a platform that isn't accessible to people? Is that democratic in any way, shape, or form? I would, and I know these things in my heart or in my head, but I guess when you realize that you write these documents and they're not fully democratized, you're like, damn, I want to change that. And so you go back into these documents, and we went through this, and like Stephanie was saying, it took hours. It took hours upon hours. I honestly think that it eventually came to being around a 10-hour review of this document to scale down unnecessary academic jargon that we're using, just to make it so folks could read it. And I think that the Green Party has something to learn from that, and to learn from accessibility in general, is that if we want to win elections, and if we want to win hearts and minds, and that's the way to do it, is you need to speak to people at their level, because people come into this with their own experiences and with their own knowledge. And we want to make sure that we're reaching to as many people as possible. And that means that we have to work harder. And we worked harder, and we're really excited about this document. There was some certain challenges. For instance, our technology section was notoriously difficult to make more accessible, just because, one, the words that's used in it, the very intense jargon that's hard to actually scale down, right? They're tough words to parse out. Like, I can't think of an example right now, but so we did the best that we could, and we were very happy with it. When we sent it back to this accessibility coordinator, they thought we did a lot better. I was talking to them yesterday, and they liked it a lot more. That's my update for you, Stephanie.
Yeah, no, I think you guys nailed it. It was very jargon heavy, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. I mean, when I was doing research on circular economy, for example, it took me days just to learn the jargon so I could just read the research I needed to read to be able to write policies. And there's no need for that when you can just make it accessible and easy for people to really dig into it. Then it's just way more worthwhile.
There's a larger picture here, I think, too, that all of you touched on in political communication, accessibility, and democracy. And people are often looking for, when they're looking at this from a different lens, not wanting to understand it, but looking for like, oh, I want to trust this. Sometimes people actually look for a concept of credibility and experience that means that there's a bunch of legalese and jargon. And it means that for the majority of people who are not already policy wonks and involved in the political world, that they're left out. But we also know, so as we see this document the way it's written out, because it's meant to talk to everybody, we also know that presenting any of these policies going forward, or actually in the House, for instance, they would have proper legalese in them added back in, and also budgetary considerations for how this actually would be working. So we are very much aware of that, but it was a choice in this particular version to put out something that could communicate who we are to absolutely as many people as we possibly could, given what we had and the structure that we had. And so I would like to see going forward for our party, certainly, that we kind of do both. And this was an experiment in policy development in that, and also in showing what we can have, and that we want to satisfy both the idea of meeting everybody where they are, talking to every community and every individual, and then also saying, well, yeah, we actually do also know how to implement these things. So more to come on that. That's the end of my list of things that I wanted to make sure that we covered in this, but I want to give all of you the chance before I give especially Chance the chance, before we move on to questions and answers, to talk about anything else that you'd like to make sure we touch on.
Well, I just want to say I'm really happy with the process. It's been a joy to work with everyone. I'm really happy with the final product. And I hope that we can keep moving it forward towards real legislation, real changes.
Awesome.
I classically usually like to raise up my team, and I have to do it here. I am so happy with my team and our campaign and everyone involved in making this happen. I know it's hard from the outside looking in to understand this, but we had so many people who took time out of their day to get involved and to talk about issues that are really critical to them, things that their lives depend on, things that they're passionate about. And it wasn't just policy, because we had to make sure that this was accessible, not just in how things were written, but how things were visualized. And so we had like anyone on the communications team, they were wonderful. The graphics team, all the graphics that you see there are beautiful. And I am so glad that, to be fair, this is the first political campaign that I've been on, and it's hard to imagine so much cooperation. I hope going forward I see this constantly, because I'm just very happy with my team. That's all I need to say about that.
Yes, it's beautiful, and the work that was put in, and the document probably would have been half the size if we didn't make it an accessible font size, but that was important to us. So Stephanie, did you want to say anything else, or should I move on?
Yeah, just that, like, kind of following Kito and Chance, that there was so many people involved, and especially for some of the harder parts, such as the sex work part and stuff like that, where we actually reached out to members of the community who have that lived experience and what they would like to see have policy changes that support and protect them. And those are the people that want to stay anonymous for their own safety. And it's unfortunate that that's the way our society is right now, but it's totally understandable. But I really want to bring out, like, the voices of those people who are our anonymous contributors, because without them willing to come forward and talk to those of us who don't have that experience and stuff, we can't make good policy suggestions on their behalf. So yeah, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge all of our anonymous awesome people.
Very, very important. So many people really contributed to this. And I think that hits a really important point too about what evidence means in the first place. Because often we think about evidence meaning consulting with expert, but expert is often defined in a very academic way, and it leaves out pretty much everybody. And then there's the difference between people who carry anecdotes versus lived experience, and what it means to translate that into policy and make sure that we consult with those affected on governance. And I think that's actually something that's left out of a lot of tax policy conversations too, is that we don't talk to everybody. We do not consult people living in poverty for what tax code actually does to people and their experience of taxation. And moving forward with that and how to do that in a respectful way and in a sensitive way is very important. I think a piece of democracy that we hope to make happen. So now is time for questions. We've got about 40 minutes for questions. And the way we usually do this, and I think Anthony usually helps facilitate, but we could do questions in the chat, and then in the order that they're put in there, you're welcome to turn everything on and answer them, or ask them. And then for this, I will say that you can also specify if there's one of us in particular you'd like to have answer the question. Otherwise, I will leave it open for everybody to give input, and also leave it open if anybody does not want to speak, they do not have to.
All right, so we can take questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Who wants to go first? First person can just speak up if they want.
I know that this is obviously not a full platform for like a federal electoral campaign, but what's the anticipated budget for say the first year of governance that you would expect, if hypothetically, like what takes priority in the first year, and what are we expecting as far as the price tag?
So I can speak to priorities, but I can't speak to the price tag yet because we haven't gone through that work. And that is also because this is a leadership contest. And so I do not have the power of the party behind me to have a lot of those resources to get it done. But we are going to be talking about that going forward. For me, I look at priority in terms of what can help us start moving forward as quickly as possible. So the way I often look at that is if we address people's immediate needs as quickly as possible, then often they will actually help us address other things because they then get the agency to do so. And I always center also around rights and freedoms. So what is it that people are immediately suffering? How can we alleviate that first, being the priority? And then also with the climate crisis and especially emergency preparedness, what are the largest things looming on the horizon that must be done? So I kind of would go chronological in impact for determining what priorities are, and what also in budgeting, looking at timelines and saying, okay, well, over what length of time are we wanting to implement this stuff? Because some of these are also very much collaborative pieces. We tried to point out when we know this is not federal jurisdiction on our own, we want to be the facilitator of this process and moving that forward. So we have some conversations about that in the background about what that's going to look like. But that is going to be when this is up to like full party stuff. And we hope that this is the beginning of the process that actually turns into a platform. But if we look at the scope of where we are right now within the leadership race, then this is not a discussion that's been happening, though it would be interesting if we all actually had the resources to do that. Does anyone else want to add to that?
As far as the budget is concerned, we have something called an asymmetry of information. We do not have the exact numbers, and that is a challenge for any policy development. We have tried to keep in mind fiscal capabilities throughout this whole process. But until Amita is leader on October 4th, we're not going to be having that full accessibility there. But what I can say is, as far as priorities are concerned, I completely agree. The focus should be on addressing at-risk populations. At-risk populations are the top priority. And I think that means addressing water boiling advisories. I think that means getting our coasts ready for the melting of permafrost in the Arctic. I think that means ensuring that economic security is provided through a basic income or guaranteed livable income. So the at-risk populations, that is the priority, at least as far as I see it. And I think it should be the priority with anyone, though we certainly know that isn't the case.
I think I'd also add that there is also a kind of fiscal attitude component to it, in that we also want to head for economic self-sufficiency. And so we are looking at, where spending comes from and, where we are getting things from. I tend to paint in broader strokes in terms of an overall budget to like find out what things would cost and then prioritize them. And then also, okay, where are our revenues? Instead of being like, well, I want to shift this to this, this to this, or whatever. I'm just like, okay, what do I want to do? How am I going to get the ability to do this, and through what means? And there is an efficiency component to that too. Like, I want to prioritize people's well-being over other things, and where can I find the ability to do that? Anyone else? Should we go to the next question?
If nobody else wants to add to that, Mark Small is next.
I think that's a question in the chat.
Then I can also, I'll read it out and answer it then. So the question is, what input did I have in the process? A lot at the beginning, and then I ran out of time. So the very beginning of this process was one of conversation and orchestration of how we actually wanted to go about this. So it was about determining our pillars, determining the core concepts that we wanted to follow. That's why we always center back to justice and equity. And then we move through evidence, and then preparedness and resilience. And also on top of that, of course, like looking at the very immediate crises. And then how we think of evidence and all those pieces. And so I was also involved at the very beginning, kind of writing out and determining how we structure the areas, how we even structure the process. So the timeline of development was something that I worked with people on figuring out how that would work best. And then kind of the evaluation, I got checked in with a lot of times. So I had a large hand in the preliminary platform. And then when it came to the work to actually develop that into full policies and match it up to previous green things, we followed the methodology that we developed together at the beginning. And then I was not as much a part of it, but I was thrilled to check in whenever I got the opportunity, and found it was exactly everything that I had dreamed of. And I think that that's actually a really important piece, is that, yeah, I had a very important structural component at the beginning, and we got on the same page about what we wanted, and I checked in and on flow, especially, and how things were going, but that this doesn't need somebody to direct it that way. And the process that we used is something that we can share with everybody. And in the green spirit, that's actually what we want to do in this, since its policy is member driven. This isn't us telling everybody what to do. This isn't us telling, this is the perfect platform, we know everything, and this is done, and we have what we're going to have going forward. This is about saying, look, we figured out how to make this policy development practice work. We could describe it and we can share it, so that we then get the strength of everybody working on it.
And just to add to that, the amount of things that Amita knows about is incredible. A lot of things that were input into our original policy matrix that were just a really, really helpful guide about things that are issues, things that need to be talked about, was hugely helpful.
And I go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to add to that, like Amita's involvement in the process, I felt really showed the leadership experience, where they were there at the beginning, and then they trusted their team to get the work done that needed to be done with check-ins. And then when we had an issue, we would bring it up to them, and they would be able to help us sort it out. And to me, that's really the type of leadership values I'm looking for, is the leadership who will listen and trust their people within. So I just wanted to throw that tidbit in.
I'm so touched. I came back at the end too. And I think a lot of different team members also read through it at the end to make sure we hadn't missed things. We're sure we've still missed things. I thought of a couple more things today, actually, but to go through it and say, okay, do I personally agree with what's here? And if I don't, I'm going to talk to the people on the team that developed it to figure out whether I actually do agree, get caught up on some of the arguments that were had. or lively discussions that were had, so that we are all on the same page.
So Kate Burton is next. Kate, do you want to speak to your question in the chat?
Okay, I'll read it out then. So what are the next steps for translating these insights into process of policy development and the greater Green Party of Canada policy processes, especially when I'm leader? Thanks. So a couple of different things, and one is actually developing the framework of this process, or writing out the framework of this process to share it with members in general, and especially with EDAs and grassroots of the party, so that we work on this. And that's the values, the evidence, like how do you do this? And also having the, I would say, experts that we have. So working with Davies and Kito and Stephanie and the others that held positions like that on the team that knew how to consolidate information. That's something the party also needs, is like the work of doing the research and bringing it together so that we can have the values component and the ideas component and the development process there and teach everybody about how that works in the membership at large, but then also have a team that can do the evidence process and then check back in with the members to say, here, how's it going? And again, just touching on the fact that it is member driven, and I would really like to see platforms be reflective of the values and make sure that all the policies we actually have are reflective of our values and our vision as well, and the evidence piece. So I would like to see definitely an audit of our past policies and everything going forward. Like what is now out of date? Let's do an evidence-based check of all the stuff we're doing, and let's check in on the ones that don't seem to make sense anymore. Like, why were these here? What was the intention behind the policy that ended up having this, so that we can preserve that? Because I think that that's really important. We want to make sure that anything that somebody brought forward, there's a reason they did that, and it's coming to that. What problems are we trying to solve? What goals do we have in mind? And making sure that that's done. And structuring, definitely there's a couple pieces of that too, in terms of picking shadow cabinet and the type of people that would work on that, and making sure that shadow cabinet then has other people that they can work with, and then having the actual like staff team to interface and figure out all the details. And then I believe also the accessibility piece, I would like to see that integrated into all our communication, not just platform, but platform. And then also seeing that, you know, we actually want to see kind of, this is one level of document, we pick the middle one. We pick the extensive ideas, but not the detail. And there's, you know, with the resources that a campaign in a leadership race has, like there's the reason we picked that one. But there's also, you know, the even more simplified version. What's the cliff notes of this that we really need to get across, and how we can deliver that? And then also having the more complex version and the budgetary process as well. So I'm very much looking forward to helping structure that team, and also use some of the team building and teamwork and consensus building processes that we've had in this that have made it work so well, and how we've come to places and resolved differences. And then also always check back, like, well, how does this fit with values? How does this fit with evidence? Yeah. And again, as leader in the party, given that it is a spokesperson role and it is like member facilitation, I see that as making the process happen. It's not about being attached to the outcomes. It's about always trying to get on the same page about values, and then making sure that everybody has the agency and the ability to get what we need forward, and to have the tough conversations when they're necessary. Next, and I'll just read from the chat as well, is what are your priorities around equity? So absolutely foundational. Everything that we look at, and therefore also what we prioritize, has to do with equity. And it's a piece that is, I think, often missing and confused in the way that policies are done, because to me, it's the secondary, it's like massive part of justice, along with decolonization, that we really need to figure out and talk about. But equity in itself often, I think, is presented in a way that is a give or take. Is like you have a pie, you divide up pieces and you give things to different people, so someone is always going to have less than somebody else. And I fundamentally disagree with that. I think that, you know, I have said a couple times now in things, but it really always comes back to this for me. I have my own set of privileges. My life has been amazing in so many ways. I got to study what I wanted. I got to do what I wanted. I get to dedicate my life to helping people. And that is a luxury and a privilege. And I want everybody to have the same opportunities that I did, the same freedoms and all of that. Conversely, given my identity and trauma and other experiences in my life, there have been a lot of barriers. And I don't have the same barriers as everybody else, but I've seen how clearly they exist. And that is an issue of equity. And I would like to make sure that we remove every barrier to participation, to access, to life, to prosperity, and prosperity not just being financial prosperity, but like food, water, happiness, health, all those things that we really should be getting back to seeking. But foundationally there is the concept of equity of people too. Not judging people based on whether they're productive or what we, within what I would say is a dystopian, broken society, determine makes people useful, but by saying every individual deserves dignity, respect, and is as valuable as any other for their very existence. Does anyone else would like to speak to equity?
Well, I mean, I think you hit it perfectly there. I mean, throughout this whole process, and this is why we brought in so many advisors, so many people with lived experiences, anonymous or not, is that most of us are lucky enough to live very good lives. And part of that means that we have a lot of blind spots, as most folks do, to the experiences of everyone else. And equity means, to me at least, recognizing those blind spots and responding to them in a way that is measured, that's compassionate to each and every person. And I think that's really what it's all about.
Anyone else? Good.
Sorry, it took me a sec to
Go ahead.
mute.
Yeah.
I guess the thing with, especially in regards to our policy platform around equity, is that many of us on the team recognized our backgrounds and our privileges, as well as where our barriers have been as well. And we tried to really reach out and bring in or acknowledge within our policy where we couldn't find people who had those experiences, that we know that this policy part is not complete, because we acknowledge that there is something there, but because of our own privilege or experiences, we don't know exactly what that is or have the terms to deal with it. So I think that's where we really wanted the living document part of our policy and platform to come from, was that we recognize that there's all these areas that we don't have those experiences of or the backgrounds from, and we need to make sure that there's room for those once those people are available to come forward with that information.
And in that spirit, we fully admit we're not perfect. Gonna make mistakes. In no way can I claim that I know everything, that I will have done everything right, that I will always do everything right. And we've made some errors along the way too in communication, and we just need to own and learn. That's all there is to growth. Deborah, you are next in the chat. Would you like to ask your question, or should I read it?
First, I have to unmute. Yeah, I've always voted NDP, and I'm really taken with the depth and the breadth of your policy. And I understand that, that the question has always been that the Greens have been better on environmental policy, but I've been concerned about other issues where I haven't felt that some of my questions have been addressed, and that's why I've always chosen to vote NDP. Reading your platform, I'm feeling a lot of those things are being addressed. Can you tell me a little more about why, when you're a leader, why one would vote for the Green Party when I'm not sure if it was Chase or Kito that spoke about the connection, humanity, the environment, it's one. And I'd just like to hear you, if you could speak a little more to that.
I'm always happy to. And I think it's also why I'm in the Green Party, is how I'll partially answer this, because I don't really like partisanship at all. I don't think it makes sense to pick a stripe. I don't think it makes sense to pick a color and to say that I will always agree with everything in a platform. That's kind of an unreasonable thing. So I ended up with the Greens because I value freedom of thought. And with a lot of the other parties, there's such a sense of partisanship that you have to ascribe to an ideology. And for me, democracy is about representation and community building. And so that's how I would like to see things go. And there are also some strong differences in terms of the way we approach governance. I am very anti-authoritarian, very anti-hierarchy, about individual empowerment and community empowerment. Not to say, it's not saying every individual has the responsibility of the whole, which actually tends to be what we end up with now. Good luck, you need to fix your carbon footprint. Everybody, you know, we can still let all these large industries do whatever, but more like the opposite of that. When everybody has the freedom and the rights to be themselves, completely participate, have their voice heard, and also be represented. So one of the ways we differ from every single other party is that we are about bringing people to government and not bringing partisanship to people. And that will always be true, and always questioning authority, saying, no, we're not going to always be right, and digging into those disagreements and building bridges when there aren't any. And I think also one other piece, because everybody's going to have overlap with somebody somewhere. To me, the biggest thing that we offer as Greens is a very different concept of the world. And that comes down to me for ecological wisdom and the connection of humanity to nature. And it is about finding a different way to live. It's not about trying to work within the current economic models that we have and change them a bit to work. It's not about, you know, getting together and fighting one thing at a time. It is at the community level, working to overhaul everything that is so broken about this, so that we do actually live in a place where we can flourish, where it is easy for everybody to find meaning in their lives, where we don't live in fear and feel like we need to accumulate things because nobody will take care of us, and where we actually set up a structure that is resilient for so long that we don't have to fear for our survival all the time. And that's what goes so far beyond the concept of the environment or the climate, but is that long, long future. And maybe this is a sneaky thing to bring up right now, but there's always this conversation about the political spectrum and, you know, whether you're left or right. And I feel like what we actually have is a political spectrum that has many more dimensions than that. Mm-hmm. And so we may agree with the NDP on a lot of things that is on the kind of left versus right thing. I would say that some of our stuff actually a bit further left, but it is not the whole picture. So it is in the other dimensions that we differ greatly. And also in the very questioning of both our democratic and our societal systems that we wish to challenge and change, and also through a lens of pragmatism. You know, Greens are about getting to work. I think the team proved that, if nothing else, in that we also know that this is not work that will be done in a day, but that we want to address the things that are immediately needed and in the future. But just to tie it all back together, for me, it is about democracy. And it is about what I see currently as a broken system of division. Every other party relies on pushing people apart and saying you need to be part of a club or not. And I just want MPs that are there to serve, that are there because they're community leaders that want to build the country. And I think that that's exactly it. We've had people that disagree on things, but we've all come back to the same place because we agree on caring for people. And I guess it comes to compassion and how we don't want to leave anybody out. And so we refuse to divide anymore. I hope that answers it. I'd be happy if any of you would also like to chime in on your thoughts on that, since you come from different political backgrounds.
I would.
Go ahead.
Hi, Deborah. I spent much of the day listening to the Green Party of Canada's Joanne Roberts' interviews with all the candidates. And people like Dimitri and I think maybe Andrew. Anyway, there is a common theme when I hear about these leadership candidates' experiences with the NDP, is that they were frustrated because they had no sense of being heard. There was more, I suppose, hierarchy, to use Amita's words, whereas, as you can tell from tonight and the discussion about how the policy was created. And one thing Amita just said a few minutes ago, you can't get everything right, but you can be open. So that, I think, is the big difference between the NDP and why you should join the Greens, for sure. A lot of the leadership candidates, well, some of the leadership candidates were with the NDP and turned away. And it's quite common among members too, I think.
Before Chance, Kito, or Stephanie chime in on this as well, I want to tie back to the concept of vision as well. And I think that this isn't actually about how we are different or better or worse than other parties, but what is necessary right now for Canada. And it is, I think, a radical truth telling, but also a reinvigoration of democracy, but having some sort of national definition. And it isn't that I fully disagree with other parties in any way, especially with the NDP. I agree with a lot of the policies, but I feel like they're working within the current paradigm, not breaking out of it. And that comes down to a very certain type of politicking. And it is the type of politicking that I do not believe will serve us in the future. And we need to break out of that to actually get where we need to go. And I can't really vouch or not vouch for the other candidates in the leadership race, because I think they actually offer very different concepts of vision, national direction, and leadership. So this party will be different depending on which leadership candidate wins. Even if we agree on certain things, there's a lot of difference in leadership style. And that's been the most interesting to me, because it doesn't come up as much. And I think that's what it comes down to. Stephanie, did you want to say something?
Sure. I've actually held memberships in, I think, every party except the Bloc, because I've never lived in Quebec. And part of the reason for that is because I wanted to have the full experience of what each party had to offer. And one of the things I fundamentally think that every person should have, and unfortunately a lot of our parties have the requirement that you can't be a member of another party while you're still a member of the party you're on and stuff, is that we should be able to have a say in every leadership contest of every party, because that is the potential prime minister that we could have. And the Green Party, from what I could see, and the reason I ran for the Green Party in 2019 was because we're allowed to be those individuals within. And I think we can take it to the next step. And we need the leadership who will take us to that next step, where we have the common goals and everything. And I see that in some of the other parties as well, but they're so tied up in the current system and not seeing the damage that the current system is doing. And it's just there for the political gain, whereas we're trying to actually build a movement with the Greens, and it's going to take time, unfortunately, that we don't have for the climate issues, but still time, and we're on the right direction. And I see that picking up space as we have these different provincial elections. But I think, yeah, the big common denominator is that we have a lot of people who don't participate in democracy. We have a lot of people who, because of the fighting between parties, because of the inability of the parties to be able to come down and actually explain policy and the processes of our government. So many people don't even understand the processes of our government, even within the party leaderships and the party members that are currently in sitting seats and stuff. So what I find with the Greens, though, is we have those people who are coming up with the expertise, and that's a scary thought to a lot of people, but it's something that I think we're starting to become more ready to embrace, and that's why I choose the Green Party out of all the other parties. So yeah.
I want to add quickly that when I do speak of other parties, I'm talking about the parties themselves and the establishments that they are, because I do not judge individuals, especially individual MPs or candidates, by their party generally. So there are, I think, some wonderful people everywhere in every party doing great work. And so sometimes, you know, your MP can be from anywhere and be great. And that's actually what I think the goal should be, having an MP that's there for the right reasons and not for the partisanship. And I'm very open to also knowing that there are people in every party, and there are definitely MPs I respect across the spectrum.
And I think what I'm hearing through this, and having read the policy, as you say, some of the policy may be quite similar to that of the NDP. I think it's the process that appears to be different. It's a new way of looking and doing things. It's a little scary because, you know, people talk about splitting the vote, and then we're going to end up with O'Toole as our, whatever his name is, as our new prime minister. But I think it's important to trust in trying something different. Yeah.
I think it's our only way to survive. I think that, you know, it's just not going to happen otherwise. And since we are so much about getting people to care about democracy again and stop living in fear, that there are a lot of people, Stephanie mentioned, who just aren't participating at all. And that's primarily what we're trying to go for, is everybody for whom none of this works. And so if we all band together, we have the power to do this again the way we want to.
We've got to get that out to people, though, so that they understand that they really do have a role to play and they can participate, and there is a place for them, because I think so many people are disenfranchised from feeling a part of it.
100% agree. That is what I believe my job is at this moment, and we're just beginning. I'm really glad you came to share tonight. Chance Akito, did you want to speak to this one?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. So when my grandmother came to this country, she came from Britain. Britain had the Labour Party, and when she came here, the first party she joined was the New Democratic Party, and she's been working and volunteering for the NDP for as long as she's been here. She loves the party, and I know so many New Democrats in my family, and all good folks, and some of my favorite MPs are New Democrats. I'm thinking Leah Gazan is one of the MPs I do really like. She put forward guaranteed livable income. So there's a lot, and my grandmother, I was talking to her the other day, and she was saying that, you know, like all of that. I'm so glad the mic is back to normal, because I don't like sounding like a drone, though I do drone on. And she was saying, you know, I love what a lot of the Greens have to say, but I'm kind of confused at why, like, what is the difference between the Greens and the NDP? And I think that on so many issues, there are so many bridges that we can build between the Greens and the NDP to make this country a better place. Proportional representation being one, a guaranteed livable income being two, drug decriminalization, and making sure that citizens have harm reduction and rehabilitation services. Those are just three, and there's so many. But I think that when it comes down to it, and you kind of touched on it, Deborah, is that it does come down to that process. And really, I think that the Green Party, based on how it was founded, was on participatory democracy, which means that we're very reliant on decentralization. We're very reliant on making sure that we solve these issues from the bottom up. And that's why throughout our platform, we're saying work with Indigenous governments, work with territorial, provincial, and municipal governments, work with them, because no one knows what it's like to be in Whitehorse more than someone who lives there. No one knows what it's like to be in Grand Prairie or Montreal or Nanaimo more than the people that live in those areas. And we should be listening to those people a lot more. And sometimes I think that the NDP has this way of doing things where they have a very national platform, and they love their platform. I think it's a strong one, but I think that we can make it better. And I think the Green Party's been doing a great job over the past few decades since it started in the 80s. But we got lots of work to do, and I think the NDP and the Greens have a lot to learn from each other. But I'm in the Greens because at the end of the day, I'm trusting the people from the bottom up. And I'm trusting that the solutions that come from those communities and from those individuals are the top solutions that we really should be examining. Not all right, but I think there's a lot of truth to them. I guess that would be my way of saying it. I'm a former NDP, or much like Stephanie, I've been in so many political parties I've lost count. But I've been in the NDP, and I know what it's like. I love so many New Democrats.
My dad also came over from the UK and is a Labour to NDP, and my mother was Green. So I've been kind of stuck in this like political space for a little bit, trying to figure it out. Kito, go ahead.
Well, I think I agree with you guys. I came from the NDP as well, and I'm definitely here to stay now. I don't like partisanship. I don't think that there can be proper representation when you're forced to vote along a national partisan line, the party line. I think maybe on specific issues, you can apply like national standards, but I think that representation loses its legitimacy when you are just forced to vote a certain way.
Completely agree with that, and I think that actually relates back to the concept of justice and equity to me, because we may disagree on things, but it's more important to actually have the conversations than to say you have to be this way. Because for me, the control of what I can be, what I can say, how I can vote, makes it so that I cannot seek full justice because something is always limited. And that whole conversation is often thrown against the Greens, but I feel like it's actually the opposite that happens, and that what I'm seeking is liberty, is freedom, and when I have the identity that I do, it feels like I'm still grading against every single system out there, and that there is no place for me. And that comes up when anybody wants to control me. Even if I agree with them 99% of the time, I'm really wary of it, because it means that somebody could try to work against, force me to do something I'm not comfortable doing. And that really touches me in a place that I'm not comfortable with, and with some of the trauma that I've experienced is actually very alarming. So I'm very convinced that to get true justice, we need the freedom, but also the respect. Because I think if we say, oh, you can just say whatever you want, that's not the idea. The idea is representation. It's not about the individual, it's about the constituents, and it's also about our values that we all come back to. What are we here to fight collectively for? And that we must all agree on. And I love also where this discussion went, because of, I think the concept of the way we develop policy is really what it is. The idea of governance, and also participating in government as Greens, as facilitation and collaboration. And that's why I don't really worry when you get more Greens, side one way or another. They always try to get everybody to common ground. And when I look at where our country is and what we need, there's so much work that can be done that everybody agrees on. And it's baffled me for so long why we don't get all that done. And it's because we're busy arguing about the stuff that we disagree with, that people would like to change, rather than getting together on all the stuff that we actually do agree on, which is majority of things, to be honest, I think. So I think that when we have more Greens in government, that's what they do. They're behind the scenes being like, okay, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, because I can get enough people on board to get it through. And it'll fine, whatever, it makes someone else look good. It's about how we improve things immediately for people, and how we figure out how to have impact within the system, and also start to question everything at the same time. Well, we are 3 minutes from the end of our session. Happy to keep chatting, but I am also just going to say right now, I also love my team incredibly. I am so proud, grateful, everything, and more than anything, honored to be a representative of the team, because I'm not here to tell anybody what they should think or what they should do. We try to live what we want to be. And in that, we have a week left to get people to join the party to be able to vote in the leadership election. So this is the moment to tell all your friends that we're actually going to change the world, and they just need to buy a membership. And if they do so on my website, then I get their $10 membership fee, and it will help this amazing team do everything that we really want to do. But also, given membership, it's a huge impact to vote in this leadership election, because it does mean we're choosing the person that goes to the national stage and has the national conversation. It's not just about what the party is, but about how as Stephanie mentioned, every single party leader is part of something else as well. And the direction that we head in is something that we all go towards together. And so that voice matters, and that ability to be represented and voting in this leadership election, that representation is way skewed. It is for every leadership election. But also, absolutely open invitation if anybody would like to talk more to contact me through my website or email info@amitakattner.ca to set up a time to chat. And also, if you'd like to join the team, absolutely welcome. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if any of the three of you want your final words, you may.
Well, I think Jeremy had something they wanted to say. So.
Thank you. Money. We've got to get to the end for September, and we need money, right?
Yes,
Yes.
and the thing,
It's a hard thing to get to ask for, but you know, given the directness and sincerity and authenticity of people who are asking on your behalf, it's probably not that hard to get if you actually ask directly. So
yes, and I'm asking some people very directly, but I also, you know, what we've done here and with the movement that we've actually managed to build, it's been about people, and we've been able to get as far as we have by a lot of small help. And when we started this process and I decided, or got convinced to run, I should say, and declared back in March, you know, we had a different team because it was 2 days pre-pandemic, and it changed for everybody. And the majority of the communities that I am connected to don't have the means anymore. You know, we would have done this with a couple $100 from people. Now they're thousands of dollars behind. So I've been very reticent to push too much because I see nothing but precarity around me. So that's why we push for getting everybody to get their friends on board so that we get by membership numbers. But absolutely, if you know somebody with the ability to do so, we would be overwhelmingly grateful. And with that, thank you all so much for coming this evening, and take care. And hopefully I'll see some of you again.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
bonsoir à tout le monde.
Oui, bonsoir. Et merci.